If you, Diane, I'm not sure I've met you yet. I'm Barb Winery, and I'm the chair of the Education Task Force. And it looks like we have quite a few people. So I forgot I don't have a full screen. I see this okay, so I guess we're videotaping right now. But anyway, welcome to our meeting this afternoon or late evening. Um, I'm also on the board of directors for the League of Women Voters Colorado as the voter service director. But I'm also a former teacher and professor. So I'm a big fan of education and especially public education. So that's why I'm involved with this. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, continue to be with education. So thank you for joining us tonight. I won't take a lot of time having people introduce themselves, but if you'd put your name and what league you're from in the chat so we know where you're from and we can keep in touch, I would appreciate that. This evening, I've been fortunate, I would say, to cross paths with our speaker tonight, Grace Lynch. I can't remember, she touched base with me last fall when they were active and working to get the right kind of candidates elected to school boards, especially down in the Colorado Springs area. And I taught in Colorado Springs for 11 years, so I had a nice conversation with those from CEA and from that area who are working really hard. And she might be able to fill you in on some of the issues that they encountered in that area, along with some of the other things that she's been involved with. But first of all, I'd like to introduce her. Grace Lynch earned her Master of Education from Regis University. She began her career in Westminster Public Schools, where she student taught and then spent 3 years teaching middle school English language arts. After moving to Grand Junction, she taught middle school English as a second language for another 3 years. And this year, she was selected as an NEA, which is the National Education Association Organizing Fellow, a national program that releases educators from the classroom for a year to train as union organizers. And to be honest, I was a member, strong member of it was CSTA back in the day, which is the Colorado Springs Teachers Organization, and very active in that all along as I worked as a public school educator until I started working at the University of Northern Colorado as a professor and teaching teachers. So anyway, welcome, Grace. We're happy to have you here tonight. She's going to share with us, at least touch base on how she sees what's happening at the local level from her involvement as a teacher, and also with her roles at NEA organizer, along with what's happening with these privatization efforts. What's the impact of losing federal funding and its impact on state funding for public education? And just exactly what are the teachers union doing to push back about all the things that are happening that we've been hearing about. So welcome, Grace. We're pleased to have you with us this afternoon. And I'm turning it over to you. After you get done with your presentation, and if there's any questions or discussions that we need to have, we'll look forward to doing that.
Great, thank you for having me. I appreciate the introduction. I was all prepared to say some things, and I don't have to, so I appreciate that. I'm gonna share my screen quick. Um, and just a disclaimer, when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat, so if you have a question, feel free to just hop off mute and ask your question. My presentation is about like 15, 20 minutes. I sometimes talk really fast, so tell me to slow down if I need to. And then we have some time for questions afterwards. So today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some privatization efforts that we're seeing across the country and in Colorado, some statewide funding efforts that the Colorado Education Association is working on, and then throughout the teachers union perspective and sort of what's going on here. So there's a couple acronyms that I might use. There's CEA is the Colorado Education Association, and that is our statewide education association. We represent almost 40,000 teachers in Colorado. And how the union is structured is that there's sort of our National Education Association, the NEA, and then within that, each state has an affiliate. And then within that, each region has something called a Uniserv unit in Colorado, and then each school district has what's called their local union. So I was and am a member of Mesa Valley Education Association in District 51 in Grand Junction, and I've also taught in Westminster. Um, so first, generally, privatization, what it looks like, who benefits, and why it matters. In Colorado, we don't see privatization show up as an overt sign that says end public schools, we want private efforts. It shows up for us in policy efforts that move public money away from neighborhood schools and into systems with less oversight and fewer obligations and people to be held accountable to. So some ways that we see that is through voucher and tax credit. We had 80 on the ballot a couple years ago, which Colorado voted against, which is great, but it still continues to come up year after year and throughout the country. Contracting out services that used to be run by districts, so custodial staff, kitchen staff, services like that, chronic underfunding that creates a crisis and then invites private solutions. So we see this in Colorado a lot where our schools have been underfunded for decades, and that, of course, creates a crisis. And then a lot of our districts in our state are hiring private companies to offer sort of solutions to these. And we also see this in charter expansion without accountability. So just to go a little bit more in depth in Colorado, how we see this show up is Colorado is a state where privatization is a lot easier than other states, like strongholds in the Northeast, because we have extreme fiscal constraints like Tabor and aggressive reforms. So this shows up in funding. We have Tabor, which caps state revenue and forces refunds even though our schools are underfunded, and it creates a permanent scarcity. Districts are told to do more with less, and teachers are told to do more with less, and our students have less year after year after year. Charter schools that are publicly funded and privately managed. Some charter schools serve students really well, and many of them don't. Charter schools can set enrollment practices, their own discipline policies, and staffing models that public schools can't. And when a charter school opens, the money follows the student, but the fixed cost of that student stays with the district. Next is the vouchers and tax credits, which I talked about a little bit. These are a lot of times marketed as choice or parent empowerment, and we want our parents to have an input. But the effect of that is having public money subsidize private education with less transparency, fewer civil rights protections, and no sort of control over that. And when I say fewer like civil rights protections, I mean that if schools aren't taking public money, they're not beholden to like Title IX and a lot of things that we have that protect our English language learners, students with disabilities, and stuff like that. And then lastly, outsourcing. I sort of mentioned this last slide, but some services like transportation, food services, some districts have substitutes that are outsourced, curriculum platforms, and even software that we use for discipline and stuff like that on a day-to-day basis in school is outsourced, and these contracts to private companies are pulling money out of the public school system, and it locks districts into these long-term contracts with private dependence on that company. So why is this sort of happening? Privatization really fragments systems, right? It weakens the collective responsibility that we have as community members and replaces it more with competition, and it's very much on purpose. So some of the people that are benefiting from privatization of public education are private education vendors. So this is textbook companies, online learning platforms, stuff like that, curriculum and testing companies, charter management organizations, and then political donors and national advocacy groups that push this sort of ideology. And that's the Heritage Foundation, among many others. I have some Colorado specific ones on the next slide. And the people who are suffering under privatization are rural districts, especially that can't absorb the drop in student enrollment, students with disabilities and multilingual learners, and communities where schools are sort of the last vestiges of public institutions. So these are just some privatization groups in Colorado. I'm not going to read them word for word, because it's there's kind of a lot on there, but we might be familiar with some of these organizations. A lot of times I get a lot of emails from some of them because I'm somebody that's in education, that is similar to the way that these vouchers are marketed, where like student choice, education, where all of these things were for students. Education choice is even one on here. Advance Colorado. So these are just some of the organizations that we've seen in Colorado that have been major players in privatization efforts in our state. So that being said, in addition to all of those impacts of privatization in public schools, what we have been seeing from the union perspective is a lot of very far right extremists that are running for school boards. And then once they have a majority on our school boards, a lot of them are following what we call sort of like a playbook. I had on the slide before this something called the Leadership Program of the Rockies. And this is, I guess you could say, a course that people enroll in. It's about a week long throughout the year. They have meetings monthly, and then there's like one big sort of training conference that they have. And they talk about stuff like this: how to dismantle unions in public education. They talk about privatization, among many other things. It's not just limited to education, but some of these tactics that we see are what we call flood the zone tactics, where there are simultaneous attacks on unions, curriculum, administrators, different facets of school district. And some of the legal strategies that we've been seeing, and this has played out in Woodland Park, is probably the most well-known example. Colorado Springs, Elizabeth School District. I do some work in Montrose, and this is sort of playing out in real life right now. I live in Grand Junction, and we were able to flip our school board this fall, which was incredible. The former school board stated that they wouldn't be renewing our union contract if they were reelected, and we were able to flip the board majority, which is exciting. But anyway, some of the first things that they do are take legal strategies like stripping public unions of legal recognition. So in Colorado, we have permissive bargaining. So that means that there's no law that says your employer has to bargain with you, and there's no law that says it's illegal for your employer to bargain with you. Some states have laws that go either way, but in Colorado, that means it is a case by case, district by district situation whether or not their teachers have a collective bargaining agreement or not. And in Colorado, a lot of our local teachers' unions have local teachers' unions, but no contract. So when I say stripping public unions of legal recognition, a lot of times this is on a district by district basis. And then banning dues deductions. So our union dues are taken directly out of educators' paychecks. And what Colorado Springs we just saw did this last spring is take away the dues deduction, which means that pretty much overnight the union loses its entire membership. And then in order to regain that membership, we have to go talk to everyone that was dropped individually and get them to re-sign up with the union and give us their bank account information, which is a really hard conversation to have, especially after losing recognition or collective bargaining agreement, when educators are like, well, what are you going to do for me? We just lost our contract and stuff like that. And something else that we're seeing is a force of anti-union alternatives. So things like PACE. PACE is an organization specific to Colorado that provides a sort of insurance for $10 or $15. I don't know exactly what it is a month. It's very cheap, and it's a way for they're backed by a Freedom Foundation, and it's a way for them to get people to drop their union membership because they're providing a similar service but much cheaper, and it's only the insurance, it's none of the other advocacy things and stuff like that that I'll talk about that we're working on later. And then we see some culture war tactics like book bans. Last year in Colorado, Brad Miller's law firm authored an anti-transgender athlete resolution that had a lot of different school board members and other people in Colorado sign on to, and targeting of critical race theory and DEI. In addition to that, there's often structural takeovers like firing superintendents, replacing legal counsel with Brad Miller or similar counsel. Brad Miller is a very notorious education lawyer who has been a major player in the privatization efforts and anti-union fervor, I guess, in some of these Colorado districts. And then controlling policy and public narrative. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why this is an issue in education, but it goes beyond that, right? Public schools are one of the few institutions that we have left that are still governed locally by elected school boards and have open record laws and public meetings. And privatizing that is shifting decisions away from us, the people who participate in these systems, and towards private contracts. And it's replacing public accountability with corporate governance and turning families into consumers instead of into community members. Once money leaves the system, it almost never comes back. And we see this in when schools are failing under these conditions, the blame is often placed on the school itself. The school's a bad school. The teachers aren't very good. The principal, I don't like the principal. And not on the policies and systems that made this happen. And we see this a lot in Bonds and Mills, especially when I moved to Grand Junction. I was very surprised by how few Bonds and Mills passed compared to other places, because a big part of that is this inherent distrust that the school district isn't going to use the money properly, or I'm always voting for a bond and mill, and don't they have enough money already? And that's just one way that we see this sort of play out in real time. So on a more positive note, I want to talk about some things that we are doing and that we can collectively do to protect public education. So first and foremost, public education survives when we fund it, and not only fund it, but fund it fully and predictably. So we're seeing this right now where our state is recognizing that school funding is an issue, and we're trying to do things about it, but it becomes very unpredictable, and school districts aren't able to operate on budgets that are solid and that we have a great idea of what's going to happen because of that. It survives when we demand transparency and accountability, so making sure that our public institutions are accountable to the public. And finally, organizing locally, statewide, and nationally to stop this harmful policy before it becomes permanent. And this isn't about being, like anti-choice. It's about being pro-public institutions and being honest about who these policies sort of serve. So something that CEA, the Colorado Education Association, is working on right now is in a ballot initiative for the 2026 ballot to raise the Tabor cap on public education funds in Colorado. And we're calling this our sort of cut the ropes campaign because the Tabor cap is one of the many ropes that is constricting public education. And raising the cap on Tabor is not going to solve the problem. And we don't want this to seem like we're going to vote on this thing and then the problem is solved, right? We're good to go and education is going to be great forever. We want this to be the first step of many that we're taking to start to solve the issue of school funding in Colorado. Um, so our goal is to refer a ballot measure to in 2026 to raise the K-12 funding cap by 2% every year for the next 10 years. And that's something that we are right now we're working legislative session just started and we're working to try to get the legislature to refer it to the ballot so that we don't have to do the thing where we go around and collect all the signatures and try to get it on the ballot in the fall. And instead, we're hoping that it'll be SB 1. So, if if you guys are interested in this work, we have a lot of ways for the community to plug in between now and the fall. Please let me know, or I can get your contact information and we can talk more about that. Um, and then I just wanted to talk a little bit more in general about what unions are and why we are important for education. I think when we hear about the union in education, a lot of times it's not necessarily positive or it's in the local newspaper and the union is trying to do this, this, and this. And there's a sort of misunderstanding about who we are and what we do. We're not just people who swoop in and save bad teachers from getting fired. There's a lot more that we do, and we try not to do that. So, labor unions are democratic organizations that are formed by workers to collectively bargain with employers over things like wages, benefits, and working conditions. So even if people aren't union members in a school district, we still have a legal obligation to represent them if they fall under the collective bargaining agreement. So when we negotiate a contract, we're not negotiating only for union members. We are negotiating for all employees that the collective bargaining agreement applies to. It usually just excludes administrators and positions where people have the ability to like have an influence over someone else's employment. So if you do evaluations or and stuff like that. And unions stand up for workers if their rights are violated and give employees a say in decisions that affect them. And unions have staff members, but more than anything, unions are our workers and our members, they're our teachers. Unions are not a third party. They're not somebody who swoops in. They're people, teachers who are doing the work every day and want to advocate for themselves, their colleagues, and their profession. Strikes are sort of a last resort. Like I said, I think when we hear about unions, we hear there's a strike, there's this going on, there's this going on. Strikes are very powerful, and if we need to go on strike, it's a great way for teachers to improve working conditions, but it is a last resort. And it's not only for teachers or factory workers. Unions represent service workers, construction workers, baristas, tech employees, can represent anyone under the sun. And what unions work towards is having a collective bargaining agreement with your employer, which is a contract between the employer and the workers that is negotiated through collective bargaining. I sort of talked about this a little bit earlier, but the heart of a collective bargaining agreement is the belief that democracy is a fundamental right of workers in their workplace. You get to have a say in how you're treated in your workplace. In Colorado, this is school districts with a collective bargaining agreement, school districts with no collective bargaining agreement, and the average step one salary, which is a starting teacher, and then top salary to someone who's been in the district forever. So school districts with unions and collective bargaining agreements make an average of 19% more on the average bachelor's step one salary, 20% more in a master's step one salary, and the top step salary, the average is 44% more. And when our teachers are happy, it has a big impact on student outcomes, right? Unions give ordinary people a collective voice to push and advocate for the common good. Union members are a lot more likely to vote, to attend public meetings, and engage in their communities. A lot of times, unions provide education about civic issues and help people make informed choices. And unions have bipartisan membership. We represent people on all ends of the spectrum. And by raising our wages and improving benefits, working condition, and reducing discrimination, it helps build a broad middle class, which is essential for strong democratic societies. So this is just to show that this is the rate of unions in the United States. it's not just teachers unions that are under attack, right? This is a national trend, and it's not just right now. It's been decades and decades of corporations just eroding at the power of collective action and of unions. So before I get into questions, I just want to talk a little bit more about my experience as a union member. Like I said, I think there is often a misunderstanding of what unions do, and for me, my union really helped me advocate for not only myself but for my students, right? If we have an unsafe classroom, if I have a giant classroom and I go and tell the school district, I want fewer kids in my class, they're gonna just ignore me. But if I get all of my colleagues to go to the district and tell them we want fewer kids in our classes, they're gonna learn better, we're gonna have an easier time teaching, we're gonna be more effective. This is how we really push things to move in education. And on the local level, we're working more on things that impact our school districts. On the statewide level, we work a lot more on sort of what I was talking to you about earlier, the ballot measure for 2026. We had a campaign that ended the budget stabilization factor that was led by CEA a few years ago. And we do all sorts of advocacy on a level like that. That being said, I want to open this to questions too if you have more specific questions about anything I said or my experience with unions. Also, my partner Jake is a former teacher and works for the teachers union, and I might tap him in if I have questions that I don't know the answer to because he is also a well of knowledge for these.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Grace. Why don't you take down your PowerPoint? And I haven't been checking the chat. I don't think there's been anything in there. But any questions or comments? Kathy.
Kathy?
Oh, good. You watching, Beth?
Hi, Grace. I don't know if you're aware, we have an education team on our Legislative Action Committee that we operate every year when the legislature is in session. And I'm a member of that team. Kathy Wilson, that's present here, is a recent member that's still remains interested in this topic, obviously. But I think we would love to see a copy of that bill you referred to that you think might be SB1 this year. We really want to get our eyes on that and to actually be involved in any stakeholder meetings that are happening.
Okay, great. That is good to know. I'm gonna write that down. We have a steering committee meeting on Friday. I actually haven't seen the language yet either. They were testing out three different. One was completely eliminating the Tabor cap, like getting rid of Tabor. And then the one that we landed on, the 2% for every year for 10 years. And then there was another one that I am completely blanking on right now, but this was the one that polled best and that we really believe is going to win. And I haven't seen the final language yet because they, like I said, they're still wrapping up the polling, but I will ask on Friday if we can see that and if it's ready to be shared. But that is great
Great.
to know. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. No, we're really interested in that. Thank
Yay, way to get on top of that, Kathy. And I don't know if I think you may have put your name in the chat, but so um, Grace can have your email to touch base with you. Kathy Wilson.
Um, I'm curious. In the paper today, I believe it was talking about the dip in population, in student population, um, and the fact that of the, I think it was 10,000 students that are not going. I can see some of them having to do with all the immigration problems at this point, but 7,000 plus students were were white, and it said that there were, what happened with that is that there was a bitter mix right now with the students. I'm wondering, it sounds like white flight. Sounds like what we had years ago in Nebraska. I'm, what do you think about that?
Yeah, sorry. Is it a drop in enrollment or is it a
Yes,
drop in attendance?
it's a drop in enrollment,
Okay, I
which
think
will impact funding for districts.
yeah, it has had a huge impact. So I'm in District 51 in Grand Junction, and the first year I moved here, they had closed the middle school that's actually a block from me. When we found our house, I was like, I could teach at that middle school, and then it had just closed. Um, and then they closed an elementary school the year after. Last year they closed three elementary schools, or sorry, I'm sorry. They have one of the towns here has a weird 8-9 school where middle school is 6
Mm.
7 and then
Yeah.
there's an 8-9 and then there's a 10 11 12 and they closed the 8-9 and then this past year they closed three elementaries and then I had a meeting with the school board member this morning who told me that they're talking about doing another one this year. And it's had a very big impact here, especially in Grand Junction. The average age is 57, and most people that are moving here aren't younger. It's people who are retiring and moving out here, and that has had a big impact. But to your point, I think a big part of it is people are not having kids or having one kid. Or having kids much later is something that we have been seeing, I think, especially with white middle class or wealthier people are either tending to not have kids or have fewer kids. Um, it's not necessarily across all demographics, but I think across most, but especially with educated upper middle class people, are either not having kids or having way fewer kids than they were. And in these rural districts, like the one that I'm in, and I do a lot of work in Rifle, and their head of HR last time I was there was saying that these farm families used to have 10 kids and now they're not anymore. And that's a big part of it too.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I see nobody else's hand at the moment. Um, I live in the Thompson School District, and we have a brand new member on our board who is causing some controversy because at a district meeting, she said she was only going to make decisions based on biblical principles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
heard it. You were sending that to me.
yeah, yeah. And there was something again in the paper today, and we don't know what's going to be happening with that person. Um, but with your experience with Elizabeth and all the other ones that have popped up, I won't say all, this limited number of people who have popped up or districts that have popped up with similar kinds of perspectives. What might you advise for us?
I'm actually gonna tap Jake into this because he has dealt with this directly. So I'm
Great.
gonna have him introduce himself and yeah, go from there.
Hey, sorry, tagging in. My name is Jake Dominello. I am a UniServe director for Colorado Education Association. I was a middle school teacher for 7 years before that. We
Me too.
obviously live out in Junction together. So that's just sort of my background. I think just to rewind 1 second and also talk about declining enrollment, I think one issue with declining enrollment right now is that COVID provided so many flexible options for education, and I put that in quotes because we could debate the quality of what that education is, right? But there were a lot of kids that were not showing up to school with fidelity before COVID that
Right.
discovered new creative online options that work for their schedule, right? So, there's definitely also this big issue within districts that don't offer like an online program themselves, where they're hemorrhaging students to these what I consider often predatory, privatized online services. That pretty much like are like writing parents notes that say like, don't worry if your kid doesn't come to school, right? Like, in a broad sort of facetious kind of way, right? So I do think like that, just to tie it back into the privatization thing, we have seen a rise of all sorts of interesting new flexible education options that are not being run by districts, they're being run by private corporations. So the question now is like, how do districts compete, right? and like from my standpoint, especially out in D51, you're never going to convince the community not to homeschool their kids. It's the kind of community that it is, right? The best you can do is create a system of more diverse options inside of your public school, perhaps a magnet model instead of a charter model that provides sort of more specialized public programming instead of offshoring that to private corporations. Now, to your point about just these sort of hostile school takeovers, my experience in out here on the Western Slope started with Garfield RE2, Rifle, Newcastle, and Silt when the president of that school board was trying to import American birthright standards. American birthright standards are tied into Hillsdale College. So I came out of the classroom, I got shipped out to Grand Junction, and my first day on the job, somebody called me and said, like, hey, school board and Rifles trying to adopt American birthright standards. Do you think you could stop it? I don't know. Maybe we'll certainly try. And we did stop it. And the way that we stopped it is like twofold, right? Like you need, and it's not, I'm not going to break your brains right now. It's actually really simple, right? When parents and educators get together to form coalitions to advocate strongly for their positions in front of the board or at the ballot box, we see better results. If we can recall a school board president in Rifle, Colorado, because of his political views, that shows that we could do it other places too, right? Like Silt, Rifle, Newcastle are not the friendliest districts for that kind of work. I would also say that we've had tremendous success in D51 over the last couple of years. Well, we've had a tremendous success in winning the election. We've had a tremendous amount of getting beat up over the past couple of years, right? But 2021 sort of opened the door for that sort of anti-vax, anti-mask type of politics into our school system, right? And I always tell people, I I don't like it, but I can tip my hat and respect that the right during the Obama era, when they felt locked out of federal power and state power, said, you know what? We're going to go through the back door and we're going to organize and we're going to take over the local level. And you know what? They did it, right? So this isn't congrats to them, but this is what lesson can we take for that, right? Which is if you don't have a strong basis on the local level, your house of cards is going to get tipped over, right? And especially in a state like Colorado that prizes local control. I'll tell you something. I grew up on the East Coast. I had never heard of a non-neighborhood school until I moved to Colorado. I didn't know they existed, right? So when I got my first job in Adams 14, two things I'll tell you about, or three things I'll tell you about when I came to Colorado first. Number one, was that my salary schedule in Rhode Island was 10 steps. So in 10 years, you went from bottom step to top step, and then you made it the rest of your life. In Adams 14, when I first signed on, I opened up my contract and found a 45-year step schedule. So I would have to be in the district for 45 straight years. So your raises on average were like $200. That's like just a crazy comparison. Number two, when I left Rhode Island, we were spending I'm going to stop talking in a second, I promise. This is why she didn't put me on camera to begin with, because I'm a dog. The second thing I'll tell you is when I left Rhode Island, we were spending $24,000 per kid per year. When I moved to Colorado, we were spending $7,500. And then number three is local control is not a widely and deeply respected concept outside of Colorado. But if you say that to somebody who's only ever lived here, they look at you like you have 17 heads, right? What do you mean I can't send my kid to whatever school they want? And there are parts of school choice that, we together as a group may ideologically agree with or disagree with. But what I can tell you is it allows people with the resources to pick up and move those resources, and it leaves behind everyone else, right? And instead of making concerted effort to invest in what you have in your vicinity, you get to choose that this one just isn't for me. So that's also sort of a problem. But what we can do about these school boards is number one, just education. People don't know about it, right? And when you start talking about it in depth, you sound like an insane person, right? I always tell people like I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a person that has recognized a conspiracy and I'm telling you about it, right? Like there is a well documented effort full of millions and millions of dollars that stems from the Koch brothers, the Freedom Foundation, the Heritage Foundation, the 2025 playbook for Project 2025. Like they wrote it down on paper, they weren't joking, right? And now it's all happening. So it's that education piece. And it's the second thing I'll say, and then like I said, I'm going to stop talking, but don't underestimate being a minority group in a majority hostile district, right? Like the real good work of organizing recognizes that you might be outgunned and you have to do it anyway. In Mesa County D51, I was never going to string together a coalition of fervent union supporters, right? Like that wasn't ever going to happen. And therefore, we need to find ways to broaden the coalition with people that can agree with us on singular issues, right? And so when I talk to people in the community about saving our contract, we talk about how union contracts provide the sort of stability that reduces teacher turnover that has been a scourge to the Western Slope for years now, right? We talk about the improved salary conditions. We talk about, and this phrase comes up a lot, but it's because it's true, our teaching conditions or our students' learning conditions. You can't disentangle those two things, right? So as long as we are fighting for both simultaneously and we are engaging even our minority of supporters, we can build a political coalition that can drag along those like independents that like don't know what to think one way or the other, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to recognize that most voters are not informed on the issues in particular, but still hold value statements, right? I support public schools, is something that we generally can agree on. I support unions is a little bit different. That's it, or I'm going to keep going all night. So, lovely to meet you all, and I appreciate you letting me
No,
have a little
stick
time.
by here. Stay by here. We might need you again.
Yeah,
Diane,
I'm
a
sticking
question.
around. I'm just removing myself from talking.
Oh,
And there
okay.
was a question in the chat about Cortez.
Yeah, I think
that don't
Diana
know if
had it.
you too.
There was what is happening.
Wait, let her
Oh,
ask
sorry.
first. That's what-
Okay. What's happening in Cortez? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can't get too fact specific because I'm like on the periphery of the loop with Cortez. But like Cortez has undergone like a whole lot of turmoil in the past couple of years, right? Including
Yeah, sounds like it.
Montezuma Cortez was the district in which the administrators were arrested last year for failing to report a mandatory reporting incident. So like there has been a lot of chaos there for a while. It's the same playbook, right? Their board majority up until very recently, and I would have to check on it since the election. I don't want to give out false information, but up until the election, was tied into the Miller Farmer Group. Brad Miller represents almost every charter school in the state, right? He also represents all of the anti-union, anti-public school boards, right? D51, Falcon, Academy, Elizabeth, Woodland Park, right? They're all sort of tied into that. So what's happening in Cortez is the same thing that's happening in all of those districts. There was a takeover by the school board for people that are sort of ideologically on the other side, who then decided to bring in their own superintendent and their own legal, and they're in the midst of that sort of turmoil. I believe I want to say that Montezuma flipped their school board, but don't quote me on that because it's not our turf and I'm not like intimately tied into it. So that's where I'll leave it. That's what I know.
Well, it sounds like they're trying to find isolated parts of the state, and that Montezuma County certainly is. I grew up in Mancos, but I had a good education, and I'm concerned about the quality of education back over there. And I've seen evidence of some pretty weird things going on down there, and I think it's isolation from, the rest of the population. We grew up thinking we lived in New Mexico.
Yep. Yeah, I will also say, and Grace touched upon this a little bit earlier with like mill levy rates. Districts that have lower mill levy rates are at much more of a like are much more vulnerable to this kind of stuff, right? Because it's that classic playbook of the schools aren't working and therefore we need to find outside solutions. But what it really is the community hasn't raised the basic floor for education funding in years. D51, I'll just use as the example because we are 175th out of 178th in the entire state for school funding. We are also the eighth largest school district. And so like there's a huge mismatch. And when you have that perpetual shortfall or like this created scarcity, you tend to invite people that come in with sweeping solutions. And those sweeping solutions
For
are
money.
why don't we just fire everyone and outsource and outsource everything, right? So yeah, that's sort of my bird's eye view on what's going on down there.
So getting people together, is that involve quality of education? Thinking, all right, what are we getting for our money one way or another? And if parents and teachers got together and say, we need quality education, maybe testing. I hope they're going back to testing for college because I'm concerned that these kids are going to be way behind in when they go off to college.
Yeah, as people that were very recently in the classroom, I think we both share your concern.
Yeah.
I think that is like a very real thing. I also think that the perpetual fight for funding keeps us distracted from the rest of the issues, right? If we are fighting to survive every year for basic needs, it is hard for us to organize to take on big standardized testing, right? Or
Hmm.
support big standardized testing, right? And so one of the ways that Colorado sort of is set up to keep educators and public employees like constantly spinning is by creating that false scarcity so you can't build the momentum to go for more. And so if we could find a funding fix that allowed us to have solid ground, we could build much more ambitious, larger campaigns that address specific things. Like I'm concerned about the literacy rate of students in
Hmm.
testing
Hmm.
to get into college,
Hmm.
right? But it's that sort of when you're stuck in the need to survive constantly, it is hard to build sort of those larger bridges.
Well, I see Tabor as being kind of the hand strangling Colorado. When we got rid of Gallagher, we were supposed to get rid of Tabor within a couple years, and it didn't happen, but we got rid of Gallagher.
So part of what we're hoping with the raising the education cap every year for the next 10 years is that it's slowly going to erode at Tabor. Hopefully
Yeah.
they'll just eliminate Tabor before then, but K-12 education is such a big part of the Tabor pot
Oh, yeah.
that if that is eliminated, the rest of it goes pretty easily. Um,
The
yeah.
only thing I want to say is like we're being very careful about how and when we talk about Tabor, right? Because Tabor is the big sort of flashing neon sign for people that say I'm not paying attention anymore. So this isn't about being disingenuous. This is a way of talking about taxes that doesn't immediately put up guards by going in Tabor first. So I just want to put that out there that although we are working on a campaign that in part deals with Tabor,
Hmm.
we are not leading with like the we're destroying Tabor message because that's never going to win. We are coming up with what we are telling people is that the bill we are putting forward adds zero new taxes to your bill. It doesn't raise your taxes at all. What it does is ask the state government to efficiently use the funds they already collect. So just to sort of, put a little bit of spin on that, it's focusing on we are maintaining the fiscal responsibility of not raising your taxes at the same time that we are asking the state government to do their job and to disperse funds in a way that is equitable and works for all.
Are you working with the governor on this?
Ooh.
I don't think
Hmm.
he's gonna be very happy about it.
Here's the deal. We'll work with Polis on anything. If Polis, that's what I'll say. We will work. We will work with any legislature or any government official that wants to work with us. is Polis interested in working on Tabor or on stopping privatization? I can tell you out of track experience, absolutely no. He is a huge proponent of the charter lobby. He actually, last year, if you followed it at all, there was a bill that made its way through the Colorado legislature, which expanded union rights in the private space. Polis took us behind doors to try to tell us that the only way he'll sign off on it is if we give him more authority to charter schools in any district that he wants with a stroke of his pen. So that was the behind closed doors conversation that was had. You give us this, I get to have more power over charters. So that's what it is. Kathy?
Um, Kind of a related question. Do you have legislators who are lining up who will put what will be, you said, SB 1 on the ballot?
Yeah, we do. I think they said no to McCluskey. I think McCluskey wanted to. I forget who they landed on, but there were a few that actually approached us and asked if we had anything for them to sponsor, which is great. But
We're trying to be we're also again trying to be careful because if the larger public sees this as coming from the legislature instead of educators, right, and parents, we're going to get a much different result in 2026, right? So there we have legislators who support this, and we're doing a little bit of a strategy game about when and where it gets referred to the ballot with their support, and so that it doesn't just get tagged as like, the Colorado legislature is coming after more of your money, right? So there's an angle there too, but there are definitely people in the legislature that are eager to help.
Just so you know, Thompson District is in Janice Marchman's district.
Yeah, we hear about Marchman.
Yeah. And she listens. And I found that she listens in the work that I did with the league on that.
Yeah.
She was actually I was at the Pooter Education Association is strong in Fort Collins, and I think they had her that they have like people come and ask questions, and they had school board members and legislators that come and talk to the teachers and the teachers union every month.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question before. It looks like we're gonna have to wrap things up pretty soon, but you're showing the statistics on those the districts that have let's see, it wasn't
Yeah, the collective bargaining agreements.
collecting
CBA.
bargaining agreements, and that's what, not just unions, but how does that percentage break down, generally speaking, of
Of
who has them and who doesn't with all the school districts in Colorado?
metro and bigger districts tend to have contracts a lot. Some smaller ones do, like Montrose we have. Do you know how it breaks
Yeah,
down?
it's sort of like divided this way, right? Either you're a metro area school or like a Front Range corridor school that has had a contract forever, or you're a Western Slope school that won a contract off a strike wave in the early 70s. So like both D51 and Montrose went on strike in the early 70s, and the contract is in part a result of that. So, whereas our Front Range corridor contracts are more stable, right? We have better working relationships with school boards. It's these like legacy contracts out on the Western Slope that are extremely volatile, because the political sort of winds obviously have changed a lot, right? And there was a lot of vulnerability in these smaller school districts, or even like D51, for example. So that's how it sort of breaks down. If you're a rural school, you most likely don't have a contract. If you are an urban school, you most likely do. And then there are just like some surprising outliers, which you're like, how did that happen? And you're like, well, it happened in the late 60s. So yeah, hard to replicate.
Oh, okay. And did Colorado Springs maintain their collective bargaining agreement, or did they lose it?
Lose it.
Yeah.
District 11.
Yeah,
Well, that
D11.
was my district, and that was the district that went on strike in
Yeah.
75 too, that I
Yeah.
was part of.
I know. It's
Oh,
awful.
sad.
And they had So their school board took their collective bargaining agreement last year, and then this year they have a 7-person school board, and they have a minority 3 up for reelection, and they won 2 of those seats. So the next cycle is the cycle that they will have a chance to flip the school board and potentially get that back, hopefully.
Okay, well, are there any last minute questions that we have? If not, I'd love to thank our speakers, Grace. Is it Jake?
It is, yeah.
I don't know. I love
No, you're good.
I love your enthusiasm, and I so appreciate, your comments, and I really did appreciate the overview of the different strategies. I hadn't quite seen them, organized that way, and I think that was really helpful for us to understand a little bit more. I know that we've seen those things, we just didn't know how intentional they are, but of course, they are, and they're being effective.
Well, as I said in the beginning, League of Women Voters in Mesa County was instrumental in being a community partner in helping us in this last school board. I have tremendous respect for Deb Stetler, who is my point of contact. And so I just want to thank you guys as a group, too. We see and feel the work that your organization does, and we really appreciate you guys being partners and advocates for public education.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your time and experience and expertise with us. Let's keep in touch, because we may have to have you back in the future to touch base and get your point of view on what's going on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
You're welcome. We loved it. I will have to say we have another education task force meeting coming up next Wednesday on January 21st from 5:30 to 7:30. Several of the task forces, the JEDI Task Force and the Religious Freedom Task Force and the Education Task Force, have put together a program. We have 3 fantastic speakers talking to us about the Universal Pre-K program and conflict between religious freedom and civil rights. And I think that's very timely, because a lot of things are hopping and going through the courts and going through the Supreme Court. So we're going to have a little dialogue about what's happening with those 3 issues: education, religious freedom, and civil rights, and the pre-K education program and what it means to them and how it impacts them. So anyway, Happy New Year, everybody, and good night, and thank you, everyone, for your attendance.